Somewhere in the dry bush of East Africa, before the sun has fully cleared the horizon, a strange visitor lands on top of a termite mound. It is not looking for termites. It walks along the crust of the mound, taps its enormous curved bill against the hardened earth, and calls down into the tunnels below. Inside, a family of the smallest carnivores on the entire African continent is still curled up together, warm and half asleep. The bird outside is not going to leave. It waits. It calls again. And within a few minutes, one by one, sleepy little heads start to poke out into the morning light. This is not a coincidence, and it is not a one-time event caught on a lucky camera trap. It happens almost every single morning across huge stretches of Kenya, Tanzania, and southern Africa between two animals that, on paper, have almost nothing in common. One is a bird with a beak shaped like a can opener. The other is a 15-inch long, half-pound bundle of muscle and fur that some biologists half-jokingly call the bravest animal in Africa for its size. Together, they have built one of the most quietly remarkable partnerships in the natural world, and most people outside of Africa have never even heard of it. Let us start with the mongoose because it is the one waking up confused every morning. This is the dwarf mongoose, scientific name Heligal parvula, and it holds the title of the smallest carnivore on the African continent. A fully grown adult weighs somewhere between 7 and 12 ounces, roughly the weight of a smartphone, and stretches only 7 to 11 inches long, not counting the tail. Despite that tiny frame, dwarf mongooses live in tightly bonded family groups of up to 30 individuals, led by a single dominant breeding pair. Everyone else in the group, aunts, uncles, older siblings, pitches in to raise the pups, guard the group, and find food. It is one of the most cooperative social systems found in any mammal. And interestingly, rank in the group is decided partly by age, with younger adults often outranking their elders, which is the reverse of what you would expect. Dwarf mongooses do not dig their own homes from scratch. Instead, they move into abandoned termite mounds, which are riddled with tunnels and chambers that termites built and then left behind. A single family might rotate between a dozen or more of these mounds scattered across their territory, sleeping in a different one every few nights. This constant movement is actually a survival strategy. It makes the family harder for predators to track, and it also helps them stay ahead of parasites that build up in one den over time. But living at ground level in the open grasslands and scrublands of East and Southern Africa comes with a brutal cost. Dwarf mongooses are on the menu for an enormous list of predators. Snakes slide into their burrows. Monitor lizards raid their mounds. Jackals and larger mongoose species hunt them on the ground. And from above, a rotating cast of raptors, hawks, eagles, and other birds of prey are constantly scanning the grass for a flash of brown fur. For an animal this small, a single mistake, a few seconds of not paying attention can be fatal. Survival for a dwarf mongoose is basically a full-time vigilance job. That is where the hornbill comes in. Several hornbill species share this exact landscape with dwarf mongooses, most notably the southern yellow-billed hornbill, the southern red-billed hornbill, and in the drier regions further north and east, von der Decken's hornbill. These are mid-sized birds, easily recognizable by their oversized, brightly colored bills, and they feed mostly on insects, small reptiles, and whatever else they can find scratching around in the dirt. On their own, hornbills are decent hunters. But paired with a troop of mongooses actively digging through soil and turning over rocks and dead wood, their hunting success goes up dramatically because every stone the mongoose flips over sends a shower of startled beetles, crickets, and spiders scattering directly into the open. The hornbill simply has to sit back on a low branch or a termite mound and pick off the insects the mongooses stir loose. That alone would make this a fairly ordinary case of one species profiting from another's activity, something biologists call commensalism, and there are plenty of examples of that in nature. But researchers who spent extended periods watching these two species together in the wild found something far more interesting happening underneath the surface. This is not a one-way freeloading arrangement. It is a genuine two-way exchange, and both sides appear to be actively adjusting their behavior because of it. The clearest evidence for this comes from a landmark study conducted in the Taru Desert region of Kenya, published in the early 1980s by biologist Anne Rasa, who spent years observing wild dwarf mongoose groups and their hornbill associates in painstaking detail. Rasa documented that hornbills influence exactly when a mongoose group starts foraging each day through two distinct behaviors that she named chivying and waking. Waking is the more dramatic of the two. The behavior where a hornbill arrives at a termite mound, where mongooses are sheltering for the night and actively works to rouse them, sometimes tapping on the mound itself, sometimes calling persistently until movement starts below. Chivying refers to more subtle nudging and prompting behavior once the group is up and about, keeping the pace of the morning routine moving along. What makes this a true, scientifically documented mutualism, rather than just an amusing anecdote, is what happens with predator defense. Both species are hunted by overlapping sets of aerial predators, so both species have a strong incentive to watch the sky. Dwarf mongooses normally handle this with a behavior called guarding, where designated members of the group, sometimes taking turns, stop foraging, climb to a raised position, and scan continuously for danger, while the rest of the group works the ground. Guarding is costly. Every mongoose on lookout duty is a mongoose not eating, in an animal with a fast metabolism that genuinely cannot afford to skip many meals. Rasa's research found that mongoose groups measurably reduce this guarding effort when hornbills are present in larger numbers, and they increase it again when fewer hornbills are around. In other words, the mongooses are not just tolerating the birds, they are actively outsourcing a portion of their predator watch to them and adjusting their own energy expenditure accordingly. The study also found that when hornbills are present, the mongooses' own alarm calling to each other drops off significantly because the birds are already doing a large share of that job. And the hornbills are remarkably good at that job. The same research found that hornbills spot approaching raptors and call out warnings before the mongooses do in a clear majority of observed encounters. Even more strikingly, the hornbills were recorded giving alarm calls for raptor species that pose no threat to hornbills at all. Birds that only hunt mongooses, meaning the birds are not simply protecting their own skins. They appear to be actively warning their mammal partners about mammal-specific danger, a level of cross-species alarm calling that is exceptionally rare anywhere in the animal kingdom. Ross's paper went so far as to describe this level of mutual, compensating behavior between the two species as unique among free-living vertebrates, drawing the closest comparison not to another bird and mammal pairing, but to the relationship between ants and aphids, where ants protect and farm the aphids in exchange for the sugary honeydew they produce, a relationship called trophobiosis. This partnership is apparently valuable enough that mongoose groups treat the hornbill's presence as essential rather than optional. Field observers working across multiple sites have documented that if hornbills fail to show up at the den in the morning, mongoose groups will sometimes simply choose not to forage that day at all, staying closer to the safety of their mound rather than venturing out into open ground without their aerial lookout. That is a striking level of behavioral dependence for a wild animal to place on a completely different species, and it tells you just how much the mongooses trust this arrangement to keep them alive. It helps to understand a little more about the birds themselves, because they are not simply passive alarm systems standing around waiting for insects. Hornbills as a group are found across Africa and Asia, and they are instantly recognizable by that oversized, often colorful bill, which despite its size is surprisingly lightweight, built from a honeycomb-like bone structure covered in keratin, the same material as human fingernails. The species most closely tied to dwarf mongooses, the yellow-billed and red-billed hornbills of the genus Tachus, are ground foraging specialists, which is exactly why this partnership works so well. Many hornbill species spend most of their time up in the canopy, but these particular ones spend a large part of their day walking and hopping across open ground, probing the dirt, flipping leaf litter, and snapping up insects, lizards, and even small rodents. That ground-level lifestyle puts them in direct daily contact with the mongoose troops moving through the same territory, which is very likely how this relationship took root in the first place. There is also a quieter, more personal side to this relationship that tends to surprise people once they learn about it, because the same mongoose groups and the same resident hornbills interact day after day, season after season, within the same territory. Researchers and safari guides alike have observed what looks a lot like familiarity between specific individuals. Guides working in reserves across southern Africa describe watching the same hornbill return to the same termite mound morning after morning, waiting with what looks distinctly like impatience if the mongooses are slow to stir, hopping along the mound and calling with what one field account described as clear annoyance. Whether or not that counts as genuine individual recognition in the strict scientific sense is still debated, but the repeated, almost ritualized nature of the interaction, sunbathing together after waking, greeting behaviors within the mongoose troop, then a coordinated departure to forage, suggests a working relationship that both species have essentially learned and refined over repeated encounters, not just a random daily accident. Safari guides have also described more playful moments that hint at just how relaxed these two species have become around each other. One frequently retold observation involves a young dwarf mongoose repeatedly flopping onto its side in front of a watching hornbill, appearing to play dead, then popping back up only to flop down again moments later, almost as if testing the bird's reaction. Scientists are cautious about reading too much into a single anecdote like that, but it fits a broader pattern researchers have noticed, which is that mongoose troops living alongside hornbills tend to behave with a level of ease and reduced tension around the birds that is simply not present around other species sharing the same habitat. It is worth stepping back and comparing this to other famous animal partnerships people may already know, because it helps explain why scientists find it so remarkable. Most people have heard of oxpeckers riding on the backs of zebras, giraffes, and buffalo, picking ticks and parasites off their hides in exchange for an easy meal. That is a mutualism too, but it is a fairly passive one, built almost entirely around grooming. People may also know about the honey-guide bird in parts of Africa, which leads human honey hunters to wild bee nests with a distinctive chattering call, then waits to feed on the wax and larvae left behind once the humans have harvested the honey, a partnership that has been documented for centuries, and even shows evidence of the birds and humans developing specific vocal signals to coordinate with each other. The hornbill and dwarf mongoose relationship sits in an even more sophisticated category than both of these, because it involves active daily coordination, real-time predator information, sharing in both directions, and measurable behavioral trade-offs on both sides, rather than one species simply following or grooming the other. Even the termite mounds themselves quietly connect all of this together. The mounds are engineering marvels built by fungus-farming termite colonies, riddled with internal tunnels that regulate temperature and airflow far more effectively than any burrow the mongooses could dig on their own. Long after the termites move on, these structures become prime real estate, first for the mongooses seeking shelter, and often for hornbills too, since some hornbill species nest in natural cavities in nearby trees, with the female sealing herself inside using mud and droppings during incubation, leaving only a narrow slit for the male to pass food through. Different species, same landscape, all quietly depending on structures built by an entirely different creature altogether. There is a practical, almost economic way to think about why this arrangement holds together so reliably, even though neither species can explain it to the other. Every single morning, both sides are effectively running a cost-benefit calculation without knowing it. For the mongoose, the cost of guard duty is measured in missed meals and lost foraging time for an animal that needs to eat frequently just to fuel its fast metabolism. Offloading part of that job to a bird that is already scanning the sky for its own reasons is, in evolutionary terms, an extremely good trade. For the hornbill, the cost of finding food independently in dry, insect-sparse terrain is high, while trailing a troop of mongooses that is actively excavating the ground turns foraging into something closer to picking food up off a plate. Neither animal is thinking in these terms consciously, but natural selection does not require conscious accounting. It only rewards whichever individuals happen to behave in ways that keep them alive and reproducing. And over countless generations, that quiet arithmetic is exactly what built this relationship into something so consistent and so widespread across the mongoose's entire range. So, why does any of this matter beyond being a great piece of trivia? Partnerships like this one are a window into how cooperation evolves in nature, even between species that share no close evolutionary relationship and cannot communicate through anything resembling shared language. Natural selection does not require animals to like each other or understand each other's inner experience. It only requires that a behavior consistently improves survival and reproduction for both sides involved, generation after generation, until it becomes a stable, repeated pattern. Over enough time, that kind of repeated advantage can shape something that looks remarkably like a genuine working relationship, one species literally waking another up for the shared job of staying alive one more day. This kind of relationship is also a useful reminder for anyone studying animal behavior that cooperation between species is not some rare, freakish exception in nature. It is a recurring solution that evolution keeps arriving at, independently, again and again, whenever two species happen to face a shared problem and possess complementary tools for solving it. The mongoose is small, fast, and excellent at digging and detecting ground-level threats like snakes, but has limited visibility of the open sky while its head is down in the dirt. The hornbill has exactly the opposite strengths, a wide aerial view and sharp eyesight for spotting raptors at a distance, but comparatively poor luck finding food on its own in dry terrain. Put those two skill sets together, and you get a partnership that outperforms what either species could manage alone, which is really the entire definition of mutualism in a single sentence. The next time you picture the African savanna, you probably imagine lions, elephants, or a herd of wildebeest crossing a river. But some of the most sophisticated cooperation happening out there is unfolding at ground level between a bird with an oversized bill and a half-pound family of mongooses, in a partnership so tightly tuned that an entire troop will simply wait indoors if their lookout does not show up for work. It is easy to overlook. It is rarely filmed for primetime documentaries, and it happens every single morning across huge stretches of the African bush, whether or not anyone is there with a camera to see it.